tell, do you see the road? I'm out to my soul into the size whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 6th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets Monster Girl Encyclopedia. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Asian Lion Heart 310 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Little Hope, Mysteria. 2 months. It had been 2 months since Harry and his wives got to meet the first inhabitants of their little village, and needless to say that it was no more an empty place. Now, Little Hope looked like any prosperous settlement. Many houses were now inhabited by the new arrivals and several people set up businesses in their new home. Where there was previously nothing at all except empty buildings, you could now find merchants, tailors, blacksmiths and guards, and let's not forget the cooks. Conrad Smith, the 30-year-old man with brown hair and blue eyes Harry had met, became the village's main tailor alongside his wife, Annabelle, who was, like his wives, a Momono. Annabelle had fair skin and black hair flowing down to her shoulders while her 6 red eyes shined like rubies. Her lower part, which looked like a spider's body, was possibly around the size of a car, which was a contrast with her upper body, which was slim and deliciously curvy. Her melons were pretty big teacups at least, which would sometimes cause many men to stare at her with fascination and lust. Conrad and Annabelle were a really nice pair, and they had proven to be excellent tailors, as the girls would always went there to either buy some clothes or simply to have a chat with them. Not that he would miss a chance to chat with Conrad whenever he wanted. Apparently, the two of them had met 4 years ago and they instantly fell in love with one another. Later, they had 2 appealing daughters, Annie and Annabeth, who were the carbon copies of their parents. A part of them, there were several others families that came to live in Little Hope. There were, for example, the Jacksons or even the Jones. The Jacksons were composed of Carl, a man in his 40s with blonde hair tinged with gray, and brown eyes, Eleanor the elf, she had blonde hair and gorgeous sky blue eyes, and their children, Amber and Jason. Like the Smiths, they were nice people, but unlike the precedent, they were merchants instead of tailors. Their main products? Mainly fruit and vegetables. They sell no meat, as Eleanor was a vegetarian. The Jones were equally somewhat nice people. Like the Jacksons, they were merchants, but they sell meat instead of vegetables. The Jones were composed of Derek, a 50-years-old aged man with gray-black hair and green eyes, his wife Atlacoya the Ocelometh, who he had apparently met some years ago during a trip to the southwest, their older son Percy, and finally their young daughter, Chamali. In their little business, Derek and Percy were the ones who sell the products, while the other 2 guarded the place or sometimes munched on some piece of meat left behind. Of course, there were not only food merchants, there were also art, furniture and even decoration sellers. Little Hope also had, like it had been mentioned earlier, its blacksmiths, its cooks and its guards. The blacksmiths in question were 2 in number, Kevin Settler and P.P. Clark. The former was a 40-years-old man with dark brown hair and icy blue eyes with a strong musculature, while the later was his apprentice. P.P. was a bit older than Harry. He was 22 years old and, like our hero and his mentor, he was already married. Kevin's wife was Sasha, a lizard man who was one of the village's guards. Kevin and her had an appealing daughter who was training to become a guard like her mother. P.P., him, was married to a manticore of all things named Mandy. She was a nice girl, but she shared the same problem than a certain hellhound we love. So it was no surprise that the 2 of them became really good friends. So far, P.P. and Mandy had no children yet. Harry liked P.P. and Kevin, the former because he was kind of fun to have around, while the latter was very wise and a good storyteller. Speaking of storytellers, they were a couple of minstrels in the village, Richard Stephen, a 19-years-old young man with brown hair and brown eyes, and his wife, Sai-Cha the Satyros. The 2 of them were greatly appreciated because of their songs, and the children loved to hear them whenever they could. Heck, He would be lying to himself if he said he didn't enjoy their songs too. Back to topic, the large building near the estuary was now the local restaurant and it was very popular. The place was greatly appreciated by not only the inhabitants of the village, but the sea folks as well. Harry and his girls sometimes went there to enjoy a good meal, and while it was delicious, some of his wives said that they preferred his food. Sometimes, they could meet their friend Daria the mermaid at the restaurant alongside her fellow mermaids, and sometimes, we could see some meersharks there. Anyway, it was a couple who became the heads of the restaurant, and they were overjoyed to see how much clients they got every day. Their names? Luigi Giovanni, a 37-years-old Italian ironically, and his wife, a succubus named Kala. Their child, a son named Enzo who was only 17, was the one in charge of welcoming customers. So far the young was still single, but Harry knew that he won't be for long with the amount of momonos in the village. Also, the library, the mansion, the SPA and the school were equally popular places. Iris the echidna got recruit some nice momonos to be librarians and help her with the countless shelves of books. Some of her staff were consisted of a Hakutaki Helena, an owl mage Eris, an Anubis Marina and a kobold Kira. Reina and her SPA were very famous as many people came to have a good time, either in the warm water pools or simply thanks to the massage services. As for the staff, they mostly consisted from people who came from the east such as Inaris, Nicomedas and Shirohibis. In total, 9 people worked under Reina. Lilith managed to hire many people to be the teachers, some humans and some momonos, and many children came there to get a proper education. There were many subjects taught: history, geography, math, languages, music, physical education, magic, etc. The parents were mostly satisfied by the education their children were receiving. Lastly but no least, the mansion. Harry managed to hire some people mainly because his wives pressured him for it and was pleased by the results. There were 3 Kikimoras, 2 Ratatoskers and a Shoggoth. At first some of them tried to flirt with him, especially the Shoggoth, Sarah, but were quickly dissuaded by his wives and now they left him be. Speaking of which, where was Harry? He was still sleeping peacefully in his bed. A sigh of content escaped his lips as he nuzzled his pillow. His wives had forced him to sleep a little more as he had been working too hard for their likings. Of course, he had complained at first, but, again, it was a fight of 1 against 7. So here he was, enjoying the softness of his bed while the girls were all outside of the manor, working. All of them? No. One of his wives was still here and in fact, was in another sit room, doing some paperworks. It was none other than his bodyguard, Sirilla the Chimera. Like usual, she had a straight face as her eyes read and signed the different paper piles in front of her. The Chimera then sighed as she finished signing another piece of paper before going deep in thought. Since day 1, she took her job as bodyguard and secretary really seriously. However, while she liked her job, it also internally frustrated her. Why? Because her job demanded many hours of her time and she had barely enough for herself. Of course, she has time to wash, eat and sleep, but that's it. No more did she have the time to have some fun with the man she loves. The 4 personalities Snake, Lion, Dragon and Goat were in agreement that they needed to have Harry right now. They had been without SEC long enough, but now, it was time for some fun. Nodding in determination, the Chimera carefully rose from her seat before making her way out of the room she was in to walk straight toward where her husband was currently sleeping. When she opened the door, Sirilla couldn't help but smiling at the sight of Harry sleeping peacefully on the large king-sized bed. Gently and silently despite her hooves, the Chimera carefully made her way toward the bed before climbing it as silently as she could. Soon she was standing above the sleeping form of her husband and gently, she deposed a loving kiss on his cheek. The action caused him to slowly wake up from his little nap, and when his eyes opened, he was momentarily stunned to see Sirilla standing above him with a smile on her face. "Good morning, love," Sirilla 3 greeted him warmly. "Hello there, gorgeous," Harry replied back in the same tone before the 2 of them shared a passionate kiss. "So, hot stuff, wanna F?" Sirilla too crudely asked her husband once their lips were no longer locked. The question was so unexpected that our hero stayed silent for a few seconds while Sirilla too was having a conflict with the other personalities. Did you really have to say it like that? Sirilla 3 hissed in disapproval to the lion. I don't see the problem here. The question was perfectly normal, Sirilla 4 hissed with boredom. There are far better way to ask this, such as, Harry, are you available to mate? Sirilla 1 calmly stated in her powerful tone. Harry, at those words, regained his senses and looked at his chimera wife, who was a conflict with her different personalities. Girls, can you please tune it down a bit? Our hero asked them politely while rubbing his eyes as a headache was slowly beginning to appear. I'm sorry, Harry, Sirilla 1 said with a small bow. Sure, I guess, Sirilla 2 retorted with a shrug. My apologize darling, Sirilla 3 said in an apologetic and gentle tone. Sorry, Sirilla 4 hissed as she lowered her head down. It's okay, no harm done, Harry began to say within a dismissive manner before asking with understanding. Am I right to assume that you are all corny? The answer was easy to guess. Harry released a soft sigh before looking at Sirilla with a soft smile. Very well then, I will help you with your little itch, he said in a teasing tone and a cheeky grin. Finally. I feel like my pee-pee is literally on fire. Sirilla 2 snarled in delight. I can't wait to have a taste of your delightful juice, Sirilla 4 hissed with contained pleasure. Thank you for helping us, Harry, Sirilla 1 said to her husband with a grateful smile. Indeed, thank you sweetie. We will try to make it enjoyable for the 5 of us, Sirilla 3 cooed to the human in a sweet tone. Then shall we begin? Harry asked them with a tiny smile. He was used to this by now. Sirilla didn't respond as she proceeded to take off his clothes by shredding them to pieces with her claws. Harry wanted to reprimand the chimera but wisely decided not to, as Sirilla was now facing his large thick pages. Slowly, she reached it with her furry hand, handling it gently as she knew he was weaker than her. Sirilla smiled at her husband before slowly stroking his pages. Her paw was smooth and soft to the touch. Escaped Harry's mouth as the chimera started to move. Her paw moved faster and faster. A wave of pleasure passed through his body until he felt something quickly making its way up his pages. With a gasp, our hero released a thick juices all over her paw. My, I have your juices all over my paw, dear, Sirilla 3 began to say in a gentle tone before liking every single drops of the substance on her paw, in delight. Hey! Don't hog him all to yourself. Sirilla 4 hissed at the goat before latching at her husband. Harry blinked in surprise when the snake came up to his face before moving downwards. Our hero watched as the reptile reached his hard member and widened his eyes when he saw her taking his member into her jaws. A second later, echoed again as his pee-pee was now surrounded by warmth and the snake shot him what could be described as a smirk. Well, it SSSSSSEMSSSSS that you are enjoying this, aren't you? I won't lie, you tastes delicious, Sirilla 4 said as the snake started to move her head up and down. Harry louder at the BLWJB he was receiving, and the sound filled the chimera with pleasure and joy. But then after a moment, our hero opened his mouth to say with lust. I'm about to leak. Hearing this, the snake's head moved harder and faster. Do it. Give me your juices. I want to feel it running down my throat, the snake hissed in excitement and lust. A cry of pleasure escaped Harry's lips as a big shot of juices leaked out of his pee-pee, and the snake greedily ate every last drop of SMN. Delicious, Sirilla 4 commented while licking her lips with her forked tongue. It seems it's my turn now, Sirilla 1 commented calmly before taking actions, ignoring the protests from the lion. The dragon firmly but still gently took his large pee-pee, which was still hard, with her scaly hand before stroking his pee-pee. Harry wanted to ask for a break but couldn't when the dragon started stroking his pages. Once again, escaped our hero's mouth as the chimera's scaly hand moved fast on his member. But Sirilla 2 ignored the sound as she was entirely focused on his pages. While the furry hand felt better to the touch, this one was not bad either, albeit it was a bit colder. After a few seconds, Harry released another massive of juices, covering the scaly hand with it. The dragon raised her hand to her face before licking the juices off it, humming in satisfaction. Harry sighed in both relief and exhaustion at having released 3 massive in a row and was about to ask for a break when he remembered who was the next one. "You are mine now." Sirilla too roared in both anger and lust as positioned herself above him. Harry wanted to protest when his emerald green eyes caught something interesting, her wet fna. She was indeed really corny. He then blinked when he felt a hand grabbing his PP and widened his eyes when he saw that the lion was placing her nether regions right above his PP. "Here we go," the lion cried out in pleasure before sliding PP into her PP. Harry gasped in pleasure as he felt the heat surrounding his pages. Hearing the sound, Sirilla too smirked toothily while looking down at him with a hint of amusement as she asked him mockingly. "Oh. Do you like having my hot and wet PP wrapped around your big thick PP? Do you, lover boy? It feel great." Harry those words, his mind filled with pleasure and lust. The smirk on her face grew at those words. "I'm glad you think so. Besides me, no one here knows how to f a man properly now, let me show you and the others here who owns this big thick PP of yours." Sirilla too cooed at him mockingly with a toothy smirk before she started bobbing her waist up and down. Of pleasure escaped both mouths as Cirilla's waist kept slamming repeatedly on Harry's bog pages. The inside of the chimera was wrapped around his member while Harry's vision was slowly getting blurry. Try to guess why. "I'm so close. Oh on, big boy. Leak deep inside my vna. I want that juices deep in my nice hot wet PP." Sirilla too after a minute of intense ride on his PP. "Here I leak." Harry roared loudly as he slammed his PP deeper inside her, releasing his juices into her WMB. Her insides constricted around his throbbing MBR and milked every single drop. Soon, Sirilla collapsed on top of her husband, panting heavily as the two of them were really exhausted. Nothing could be heard except gasps of exhaustion, as they both tried to catch their breath. "It was amazing," Harry managed to say after a few minutes. "Yes, nothing better than a WMB full of your delicious juices," Sirilla too commented with a smirk as she patted her nether regions with a proud look. "Thanks to you, I feel as though I traveled for days without stopping," Harry grumbled weakly while shooting a smale glare at the smirking chimera who didn't look apologetic at all. "You poor dear, that brute didn't hurt you, did she?" Sirilla 3 asked him in a gentle and maternal tone. "No thank you, I just feel drained, that's all," Harry said comfortingly to the goat with a soft smile on his face. "Well then you should rest a bit more to regain your strength," Sirilla 4 hissed gently to the man. "If you want, we can stay with you. Take this as an apology for forcing you to bed again," Sirilla 3 gently said to him with a smile. Harry shot a warm smile at the chimera, who returned it before the two of them snuggled against one another on the bed. Maybe a few more minutes of rest wouldn't hurt. Time skip. It was the beginning of the afternoon and Harry was exhausted. He was not totally cured from his loving session, for lack of better terms, with Sirilla, and he had to go to work. He was the mayor of the village after all, so he had to make sure everything was good and that his citizens were happy. Apart of the fact some buildings were still empty, things were good and the smiles he saw on many faces proved him that everyone was happy. Currently, our young hero was sitting on the shore with his feet in the cool water of the river. To be sure he was alone, he went up the river and after a few minutes of walking, he found the ideal place. It was a large pool of clear water surrounded by trees and plants and fed by a small waterfall. Before leaving, he had asked Sirilla to not follow him as he wanted to have some time to himself, and the chimera reluctantly accepted before stating that she had some paperworks left anyway. Harry closed his eyes with a content sigh, listening to the peaceful, soothing sound of nature echoing all around him, the chirping of the birds, the rushing water, the croaks of the frogs, etc. Our young hero felt like he was in paradise and that nothing could disturb this peaceful and enjoyable moment. Sadly, he once again played with fate. "Harry," the sound of someone calling his name broke his reverie and he turned his head to see who it was. His emerald green eyes landed on the familiar form of Gabrielle, the griffin who was approaching him. He was about to greet her when he noticed the urgent look on her face. "What's going on, Gabby?" he asked her with concern as he went back on his feet. The patrol had caught a group of intruder 4 men and 4 momonos, Gabrielle answered in a serious tone. "No bandits then, maybe they are travelers." "We thought so, but when we asked them, one of the men said they were looking for someone," the griffin answered in a stern tone mixed with worry. He had a bad feeling about this. "Who?" As he asked this question, he couldn't help but feeling dread inside. "You," was her answer. Harry stared at the griffin for a few seconds, unable to say a word after what she just revealed to him. A moment ago, he was enjoying a peaceful moment with nature, and then, Gabrielle entered the fray before telling him that some people were looking for him. A part of the villagers and some people from the city he and his wives minus Iris grew up in. Our young hero didn't know many humans and wondered who could be looking for him until he remembered something. Something that was buried deep into his mind. He remembered when he was younger, around 12, and was celebrating his birthday. Harry remembered what Lady Magic, who had surprised both him and his family by her visit, said to him, about the wizarding world looking for their missing hero and the countless searching parties sent by both the Ministry of Magic and Dumbledore to find him. At the memory, our hero felt nothing but fear as many thoughts passed through his mind. Who were they? Were they followers of the man responsible for the years of torture he endured at the Dursleys? Or were the followers of the creature who killed his parents? "Are you sure they were looking for me?" Harry asked his wife after a moment of thoughts, internally hoped that it wasn't the case. "I'm sorry, dear, but they are, unless there is another Harry James Potter running around someone," Gabrielle answered in a sad tone before it shifted into playfulness at the end. Our hero snorted in amusement as he shook his head slightly. Trust the griffin to joke at such dark moments, but, at least, he wasn't stressed anymore, at least, for now. "Take me to them," the green-eyed young man demanded Gabrielle in a stern tone and a look of determination on his face. The griffin nodded her head in acceptance before walking away, quickly followed by her husband. As the two made their way toward where the intruders were detained, our hero was still curious of those strangers and, unable to contain his curiosity, he turned his head toward his wife. "What can you tell me about them?" Harry asked the griffin as he walked beside her. "As I told you, there were 4 humans and 4 momonos. 2 of the humans were adults while the other 2 looked a bit older than you," Gabrielle answered after a second or two of thought. "What of the momonos?" Harry asked her with a curious raised eyebrow. "Well, they were all different ages like humans. One was younger than you, another was a few years older, another was at most 10 years older, and the last one looked as old as you or me," the griffin answered in a calm tone, but it was clear that she was troubled. "What type of momonos are they?" Harry asked her, still curious. "You will see," Gabrielle cooed teasingly at him while shooting him a grin. Our hero grumbled in slight annoyance as he shot her a small glare, but it didn't affect her at all as she giggled loudly at his expression. Sighing in resignation, Harry then silently followed after the griffin as she led him toward where the intruders were detained for the time being. Soon enough, he started to hear voices echoing in the distance. "Can't you just let us go already?" a masculine voice inquired with frustration clear in his tone. "You are not going anywhere until Mr. Mayor and the captain are here," a strong and stern feminine voice answered to the man in a cold tone. "We don't want any trouble, as we said, we are just looking for someone," a feminine voice, younger than the precedent one, explained to whoever she was talking to. "While I understand your reasoning, we cannot let you go yet." The first female voice echoed again in the same tone, albeit softer than earlier. Harry could hear someone cursing in frustration, but then 2 voices echoed in the air, both masculine. "Please dash. Let us go dash. We promise dash. To not do anything dash. Against you or anyone else," the voices said at the same time before groans of annoyance echoed in the air. "Did you really have to do that?" a feminine voice snarled strongly at the 2 guys who talked. "Of course. After all, dash. It is our job to dash. Annoy people," the 2 guys said again, and Harry couldn't help but snorting in amusement when groans echoed again. These 2, whoever they were without a doubt interesting. In a funny way. At his side, Gabrielle looked equally amused, but then her face went blank as she pushed some bushes out of the way, entering a large clearing where a group of people were waiting for them. As he stepped into the clearing, Harry instantly recognized 3 of the people present, 3 Momonos who served as guards under the leadership of Gabrielle. One was a lizard man named Lydia, the second was a centaur named Cecilia, and the last guard was a mantis named Mandy. All 3 of them had their weapons pointed at a group of people, forming a circle around them to prevent them from escaping. The Momonos were growling or glaring at the intruders but still, didn't try to attack them. As for the group, they were looking at the trio with either defiance, fear or fascination. Captain Gabrielle. Mandy greeted the Griffin when she saw her approaching. Captain. Cecilia and Lydia greeted the newcomer as well but didn't move their weapons away from the group. At ease, ladies. Gabrielle said calmly to her guards before looking at the intruders. Harry, who was still hidden in the shadows, turned his eyes toward the group of intruders and couldn't help but studying them. Like his wife said earlier, there were indeed 4 humans and 4 Momonos. The first human was a tall, well-built and handsome man with fair skin, medium, lustrous black hair and striking gray eyes. He looked like an aristocrat with his fine clothes and good looks. He looked to be around his late 30s. The second human had a pale face with premature lines, and light brown hair which was flecked with gray. It was surprising, considering that he looked no older than the man beside him. In addition, the man had scars cutting across his bearded face. The cuts appeared to have been made by a wild animal. Lastly, his clothes were as fine as the other man's but didn't look like an aristocrat. The other 2 humans were, without a single doubt, twins, as both of them were tall and skinny in appearance. Also, they both had flaming red hair and freckles on their faces. In their eyes, Harry could see mischief in them and he instantly understood that the 2 of them might be pranksters. Our hero noted the little sticks they had in their hands and narrowed his eyes but didn't comment on it, knowing that wands were useless against creatures of this world. Turning his eyes away from the humans, Harry's eyes landed on the Momonos with them and studied them as carefully as he did with the humans. The first Momono looked to around the same age as him and had neck-length brown hair, yellow eyes, and D-cups melons. She looked plump with the many feathers covering her and her feet were talons instead of human feet. At the top of her head, Harry could see what looked like ear tuft which made him realize that he was looking at an owl mage, a kind of harpy. From what he knew about this type of harpy, owl mages were prudent, calm and pretty docile as well as really smart. Which was understandable as the owl was the symbol of wisdom. She was kind of cute as she looked like a puffy chick but quickly chased those thoughts away to look at the other monster girls of the group. The second Momono was a young woman who looked at least 10 years older than him with a pale heart-shaped face, dark twinkling eyes and spiky violet hair. Of all the Momonos, she looked the most human but, appearances can be deceiving as the saying goes. The third Momono was a tall, maybe as tall as Gabrielle and pretty strong looking. Her arms and legs were humans in appearance from torso to waist and from elbow to knee and her face was equally human looking. Otherwise, her entire body was covered in blonde fur and she had what looked like bare limbs complete with large and sharp-looking claws on both hands and feet. Her eyes were brown which was a contrast to the color of her fur. She was Grizzly, a bear-type Momono. From what he knew, those Momonos are usually docile and gentle but were deadly strong and very fast, and they like to prove it whenever they go looking for their future mate. Like the owl mage, she was good-looking and pretty cute. Then our hero's eyes landed on the last Momono among the intruders. The girl in question was sitting on the right shoulder of Grizzly and she was, so far, the smallest of the group. She looked to be a bit bigger than his hand, maybe because she was a fairy. She had straggly, waist-length dirty blonde hair and silvery blue eyes filled with innocence and dreams. She was wearing nothing particular except clothes made of leaves, which wasn't shocking, seeing what she was. Shaking his head, our hero then focused on his wife as she was looking over at the group like he did not long ago before looking at her guards. "Did they tried anything in my absence?" she asked Cecilia the centaur in a serious tone. Nothing ma'am, well, nothing drastic, I mean they did try to convince us to let them leave, but as you can, the centaurus began to say before being interrupted by Mandy. They haven't moved, the mantis said coldly while looking at the intruders with distrust, her sharp pincers shining a bit under the sunlight. My lady, may I ask where is the mayor? The lizard man Lydia asked the griffin with some curiosity. He is over there, you can out now, love. Gabrielle said to the lizard man before shouting the last part toward the bushes where our hero was hiding from view. Taking a deep breath to calm his nervousness, a part of him hoped that the group weren't followers of either Dumbledore or Snakeface. Harry then slowly made his way out of his hiding place with a straight look on his face. At the sight of him, Lydia, Cecilia and Mandy bowed at him in respect, greeting him softly, Mr. Mayor/Sir. Harry nodded at them in greetings before looking at the group whose members were staring at him in shock and stupor. The oldest ones thought they had just seen a ghost literally, but then, one of them, the dark man, stepped forward. The guards, seeing this, pointed their weapons at him, but a gesture of his hand stopped them from attacking the man. Harry? Is that really you? The dark man asked him with an expression filled with hope as some tears could be seen slowly forming in his eyes. Who are you? And how do you know of me? Harry asked him in a stern tone, his green eyes showing no emotions. I am well, you might not remember me, but my name is Sirius Orion Black. I was a friend of your father and I am your godfather, the dark man explained to him in a sincere tone. Hearing this, Harry froze as a distant memory flashed through his mind. He was laying in a crib as a baby and suddenly, he found himself facing a younger version of the man before him. He remembered how he raised his arms to be picked up, but the man who happily did it with a large smile on his face. A second or two later, a name popped out of his mind just as the memory faded away. Padfoot, he asked the man in a really soft tone, to the point it was almost a whisper. Instantly, the man Sirius's eyes were filled with tears before the two of them hugged one another tightly. The guards, when the man rushed forward, had almost attacked him, but they quickly backed off when they saw he wasn't doing anything against their mayor. You remember me, Sirius whispered softly as he hugged his godson as tight as he could in his arms. I do. I always dreamed about seeing you again, Harry whispered back softly before he pulled himself away from the man, adding. Which remind me of something I wanted to do for some time. What is it? Sirius asked him curiously. Harry smirked at him before punching the man in the chin. Gasps echoed from the intruders while Gabrielle and her guards watched in silence, with the griffin having a little grin on her face. Ow! What was that for? Sirius asked him with anger and surprise as he rubbed his chin in pain. This was for going after Pettigrew instead of taking care of your godson, you mutt. Harry hissed sternly with a scowl. Godson and godfather stared at one another in the eyes for a moment before Sirius lowered his head down with a sigh of shame and sorrow. I deserve that, all right, he grumbled good-naturedly under his beard as he went back on his feet. However, did you really have to punch me that hard? Yes, was Harry's answer. Sirius pouted like a child, which caused some people to snicker in amusement at the comical scene. Then brown and gray-haired man stepped forward to clap a hand on Sirius's shoulder. Stop acting like a child, Padfoot, the man said to Black before looking at Harry, ignoring the glare sent his way by his friend or the F off Remus. Harry, I am Dash. Mooney, our hero, interrupted him with a tiny smile that caused the man to relax a bit as a smile graced his face. Where were you? Harry asked him coldly, which caused everyone to stiffen a bit. Huh? Where were you after the death of my parents? Where were you when I needed you the most? Padfoot, I can understand as he was in prison, but you? Harry asked him in a harsh tone. Harry, I would have loved to raise you, but I couldn't. The Ministry of Magic would have never allowed me to because of Dash. Because of his furry little problem, Sirius shimmed in with a playful smirk. Harry raised an eyebrow at this, wondering what this meant. Remus shot his longtime friend a look but then looked back at Harry to answer in a pained tone, I am a werewolf. Frowning, our hero's eyes shined a bit as he stared at the man from head to toe, using his powers to scan the person before him. Remus and the rest of his party blinked at the sudden inspection but didn't try to stop it. A few seconds later, Harry's eyes returned to normal as our hero said in a formal tone, "Well, if you were a werewolf before, you're not now." Hearing this, Remus blinked in shock and behind him, Sirius and the rest of the group minus the guards, the fairy and Gabrielle looked just as stunned. "What?" Remus dumbly asked, as if he couldn't believe what he just heard. "You are not a werewolf anymore. Your lycanthropy must have been erased when you all entered Mysteria," Harry repeated in an amused tone. Tears appeared in Remus's face before he pulled the younger man into a hug. Sirius soon joined in and the trio hugged one another under the eyes of the others. Remus was overjoyed. He was not a monster anymore. No longer will he need to take wolfsbane potions once a month. Now he could go wherever he wanted and had any jobs. "Thank you, Lady Magic," the former werewolf thought to himself as he hugged the son of James and Lily. For a moment, the trio stayed in this position and soon, Harry was the one to break it with a smile on his face. "I'm so happy to see you, but who are they?" our hero asked his godfather and uncle. As his emerald green eyes landed on the fiery red-haired men and the Momonos with them. "Well, my good man, I am the great and magnificent Fred Weasley, and this less handsome version of me is my twin brother George," one of the redheads said dramatically while faking to be an aristocrat. The twin, George, snorted at his brother before retorting playfully, "Don't listen to him. Everyone know that I am the most handsome of the two." "You are not." "I am." "You are not." "I am." "You are not." "I am." "For the love Lady Magic, stop acting like children or I will kick your skinny peaches." The pink-haired woman snarled at the two with annoyance if the tick mark on her forehead was any indication. "Yes ma'am," the twins cried out at the same time while performing a fake military salute. Around them, some people looked on in amusement or with blank expressions. One of the guards, Lydia, looked toward the grizzly before asking softly, "Are they always like this?" "You have no idea," the bear girl answered with a deep sigh as her shoulders slumped a bit, earning a soft cry from the fairy sitting on her right one. "Are you going to tell us your name or do we have to lock them into cells?" Cecilia asked sternly as she crossed her arms over her bust, her eyes narrowed slightly. A shiver passed through the members of the group at those words. It was the owl mage who opened her mouth to speak, once the fear was pushed aside. "Well, my name's Hermione Granger. With me, there are Tonks." She pointed at the pink-haired girl, Lou Dash. "Wait, your name is Tonks?" Lydia asked the pink-haired girl with a frown of confusion. "Yes," Tonks answered with a shrug. "No other names?" "I do, but it is classified," Tonks retorted with a small grin. Cough Nymphadora cough. Sirius coughed in his fist while a small smirk was traced on his face. Instantly, the pink-haired young woman turned her head toward him with fire in her eyes and her hair turned red in embarrassment and anger. "Don't call me with that cursed name, you mutt." "But it is such a gorgeous name," Sirius began to say before yelping as he dodged a little spell aimed his way. "You are not the one living with it." Harry and Gabrielle glanced at one another with amusement, and the guards looked just as amused by the scene. Luna was giggling repeatedly from her seat on Katie's shoulder. However, the comical moment was broken by a certain party popper we all know and love. "As I was saying, we have next Luna Lovegood." She pointed at the fairy, and Katie Bell. She pointed at the bear girl, Hermione said with annoyance at first at being interrupted before her voice turned softer. "A pleasure to meet you," Katie said with a smile as she looked at everyone present. "Hi everyone." Luna greeted them all with a bright smile on her face. "She sure is cheerful," Mandy commented with an amused raised eyebrow, which caused some snorts and chuckles to escape the mouths of some people present. "Have you been feeding her with sugar or something?" Gabrielle asked them with a teasing grin. "No," Hermione answered with a sigh while Katie added with a roll of her eyes. "She is always like this." "Well, it's a pleasure to meet you all, but I am curious, what are you all doing here? I mean, I know you are looking for me, but why?" Harry asked them with a serious and somewhat curious expression. Katie, Hermione, George, Fred, Tonks, Remus and Sirius looked at one another with hesitation. Luna, still had a big smile on her childish face as she looked at everyone present. I think it is better if we discuss this in private, Remus said, with a somber look on his face. After the former werewolf said those words, Harry, Gabrielle and the guards took the group toward the manor our hero and his wives resided. Of course, they helped with the luggages the newcomers had with them. Luggages? Yes, they had trunks with them. When asked about it, Katie explained that Lady Magic made sure that their belongings would come with them in this new world. The others had all nodded, even if Sirius had a dark look on his face. Curious about it, Harry decided to ask about it once they reached his domain. As they passed through the village, they had caught the attention of many residents and some of the children had looked at the newcomers with clear curiosity. Sirius, Remus, George and Fred particularly caught the eyes of some of the still single Momonos of Little Hope, who wouldn't stop sending them clear messages such as stuck winks, blowing kisses etc. Of course, while the men were all charmed by those actions, they had been swiftly reminded of the situation thanks to Katie and Tonks, who slapped the back of their faces while sternly telling them to stop acting like idiots. Remus, hadn't been slapped but did receive a sharp glare from Tonks. It was a glare that could frighten a dragon. For the rest, the trip went well since the presence of the guards dissuaded anyone from approaching the group. When they arrived at the grid surrounding the manor, Katie, Hermione, Fred, George, Sirius and Remus all gaped at the splendor of the building in front of them. The girls were amazed by the well-kept garden forming a circle around the building, and Luna had stars in her eyes as she looked at some of the flowers among the grasses. The men, were more interested in the building itself, a four-floored manor with towering columns, grand archways and numerous balconies and windows. Merlin, do you really live here? Tonks asked Harry with amazement after a moment of stunned silence. Yep, I built it with my wives, our hero responded with a shrug as if it was no big deal. Wait. Wives? As in, multiple girls? Fred asked him with shock as all eyes turned toward him with equal expressions. Yeah, I have 7 wives and the gorgeous Griffin over there is one of them, Harry answered with a charming smile as he turned his head toward Gabrielle. Sweet talker, the Griffin cooed with a smirk before the two of them shared a kiss. Katie, Tonks and Hermione looked disgusted at the prospect of a HRM while the rest looked really interested. Thankfully, Sirius, Fred and George quickly lost their dreamy looks at the glares they received from 3 of the girls. You built this place? Remus asked him in an attempt to quickly change the subject. The men all shot him a grateful looks while the Momonos minus Luna, who was still looking at the flowers, narrowed their eyes at him. We did. Gabrielle and Harry said at the same time with proud grins. We also built the village, the Griffin added with a smirk, and her words caused the entire group minus Luna and the guards to gap at them in shock. Harry looked at the scene in amusement before looking at the guards. Thank you for your time, ladies. You are free to take the rest of the day off. Cecilia, Lydia and Mandy bowed to the waist to their mayor, thanking him for his kindness, before leaving to return to their own homes. Harry and the others watched them go until they disappeared from sight before entering the large manor that was the home of our hero and his girls. While they were impressed and intrigued by the exterior of the building, the interior completely took their breath away. Marble floors, several paintings on the walls, statues. It was without a doubt a gorgeous place to live in. Are you sure you built this? Because it's DMN amazing. Tonks replied with an impressed smile as she and her comrades followed Harry and Gabrielle as the two led them further into the building. Thank you for your kind words, and again, yes, we did build this place, the Griffin said to the pink-haired woman with a smile before they all stopped as someone approached the group. It was a Momono and one Gabrielle and Harry instantly recognized. It was Kashali, one of the Kikimoras Harry hired as maids. Kikimoras are peculiar Momonos that excelled at housework and other caretaking duties. In appearance, they looked like a human woman, except that she had 4 wolf-like ears, feathers adorning their arms and vulpine-like tail. Kikimoras were internationally known for being docile and accommodating Momonos. And Kashali was no exception at the rule. MSTR Harry MSTRS Gabrielle, welcome back to your home, the Kikimora said respectfully while bowing at them. "Hello Kushali, are my other wives here at the moment?" our hero asked her with a warm smile. "Yes, my lord, they are all in the relaxation room," the Kikimora answered in a calm and paused tone before her eyes landed on the group of people with her MSTR and MSTRS. "MSTR, are those people with you?" she asked him curiously. "Yes, they are. Can you and rest of the staff prepare the dining room? For not only us but our guests as well?" Gabrielle asked the canine maid with a smile. "As you wish," Kushali said back to them with a bow before leaving the room to go elsewhere. "Is she your maid?" "She is dressed like one," Hermione asked their guides with a raised eyebrow. A long time ago, Hermione would have been outraged by this mainly because of how house elves were treated back in their former world, but now, she grew more lenient about it as she understood that some people actually like to work for someone else. "Yes, she is, Ms. Granger. Kushali here is our head maid and a DMN good one at that." Harry answered to the owl mage with a tiny smile as he then turned his head toward Gabrielle. "Can you go fetch the girls please?" "I will take them to my office," our hero said to the griffin, who nodded at him before walking toward another part of the room. "Follow me people," Harry said to the group once the griffin was out of sight, and they silently followed him as he led them toward what looked like a large room where stood a desk, shelves, and a pile of folders. Harry went to sit behind the desk and, with a wave of a hand, multiple chairs appeared in thin, much to the shock of the little group for his use of what they called wandless magic. Still in shock, they still sat on the summoned chairs, forming a semicircle around the desk as their eyes were glued on the familiar form of Harry James Potter. "Now that we are comfortable, do you want some drinks?" Harry asked his guests after a second or two of awkward silence. "Tea, please," Hermione, Katie, Sirius, Fred and George said at the same time. "Coffee for me." Tonks and Remus answered politely before looking at one another in shock at having spoken at the same time. "All right then," Harry chuckled in amusement before touching a little device on his desk. Instantly, a microphone appeared before him. "Can Rachel come to my office?" "I repeat, can Rachel come to my office?" "Thank you," he said through the device before putting his hand away from it to look at his guests, the microphone disappearing from sight. "What was that?" Sirius asked him dumbly as he stared at where the device previously stood. "Well, it was a microphone. Don't you know what that is?" Harry asked him with a frown of confusion. Fred, George, Luna and Sirius all shook their heads while Hermione, Katie, Tonks and Remus nodded in answer. Harry stared at them blankly for a moment, unable to comprehend how people could not know about such a simple device. His confusion must have been pretty clear as Remus opened his mouth to explain calmly. "Harry, I don't know if you know, but, in the wizarding world, the world your parents lived in before their deaths, wizards and witches don't know anything about technologies. Yes, they still live in the 17th century and mostly refuse to change their ways," Tonks added with a sigh. "It's worse than I thought. Then Lady Magic had told me about a bit about the wizarding world, such as being filled with corrupt and lazy people, senile old fools, bigots and racists, but she didn't told me that it was that bad." Harry replied with disappointment as he massaged his forehead with a hand. Some of the people present wanted to protest but quickly thought about it before slumping in disappointment to have nothing to refuse these accusations. Everything said by the young man was true after all. But then they remembered something. "Wait. Lady Magic told you about our world?" Katie asked the young man with wide eyes. "Not in detail, but from what she told me, the wizarding world is not a place I would want to live in. I prefer the life I have here. It's much more peaceful," Harry answered to the blonde grizzly with a sigh of relief. "I can understand that." Remus nodded in understanding from his seat while Hermione, Luna, Katie, George and Fred nodded their heads in agreement. "Did she also tell you about your parents?" Sirius asked his godson in a soft tone filled with melancholy. "She did. She told me that my father, James Fleamont Potter, was the lord of an ancient and noble house as well as a good man, and that my mother, Lily Evans Potter, was the brightest witch of her generation with a fiery temper to boot." The last part was said with a hint of humor. Remus and Sirius snorted in amusement. "I can attest of that. Lily was a nice and smart woman, but man, run to the other side of the world if you accidentally make her angry. Sirius explained with nostalgia before shivering at the last part, as if he just remembered something painful. You would know about it as you were, along with James, the main target of her ire. Remus said to his longtime friend with a smirk. In response, Sirius shot him a warning glare but did nothing to wipe the smirk out of the former werewolf's face, especially when the same man started to speak with amusement. Harry, I could write a book about how many times your father and godfather ended up bruised and injured by an angry Lily Potter, for example. There was a time when Sirius mixed his shampoo with green dye. I don't think I need to describe you all what had happened that day. Sirius shivered again at the memory while everyone stared at him with wide eyes. Harry, was staring at his godfather with amusement and curiosity, wondering what his dead mother did to him to leave him so scared. What did she do? He asked the former werewolf with a tiny grin as he leaned his face closer with curiosity clear on his face. Sirius shot another warning glare toward Remus, who instead of cowering, shot back a smirk before answering. She almost castrated him. The men minus Remus all winced at those words while the girls all nodded in approval. Harry felt dread when he noticed this. Don't they see that the punishment was a bit harsh? Or were all girls SDST? Thankfully, his thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of someone. You called for me, MSTR. Turning their heads toward the entrance of the office, they all saw a squirrel-like girl standing there in a maid outfit. She looked kind of cute with her smiling face. The group from Earth didn't know it, but the newcomer was called a Ratatoskr. Yes, I did. Rachel, can you prepare us 6 cups of tea and 2 cups of coffee, please? Harry asked the Ratatoskr with a soft smile. Yes, MSTR. Rachel said with a bow before dashing away toward the kitchen. Another maid? Tonks asked Harry with a curious raised eyebrow. Yes, and before you ask, I have 6 maids in total, the young man answered to the pink-haired woman who nodded in acceptance. Are they paid? Hermione couldn't help but ask. Yes, they are, Harry answered with a nod and a straight face. The owl mage opened her mouth to speak again when the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Harry! We are here! Gabrielle cried out as her head appeared at the entrance. And I'm glad you are. Please come in, the lord of the manor said to his griffin wife with a warm smile on his face. Gabrielle smiled before entering the office, quickly followed by the rest of her HRM sisters, Lilith, Iris, Hella, Sirilla, Reyna and Pyralis. Sirius, Remus and the rest of their group stared at the newcomers with wide eyes of shock and amazement along with gaping mouths. The girls went to stand behind their husband, looking at the intruders with different expressions on their faces. Reyna was looking at them serenely, Sirilla with suspicion, Hella with a wolfish smirk, Gabrielle with a soft smile, Iris with sternness, Pyralis with narrowed eyes and Lilith with a friendly smile. Shooting them a warm smile, Harry then turned his head to look at his guests before saying, Ladies and gentlemen, seeing that you already know Gabby, allow me to present you the rest of my wives, Sirilla the Chimera a nod from the girl in question, Reyna the Ryu a respectful bow of the head, Iris the Echidna a tiny smile, Hella the Hellhound. The grin on the girl's face grew a bit, showing more teeth, Lilith the Succubus a friendly wave and Pyralis the Wyvern a huff from the girl in question. My loves, allow me to present you our guests. Sirius Orion Black the man gave a friendly smile and greetings, Remus Lupin he gave a respectful nod, Nymphadora Tonks shot a glare toward Harry for the use of her name, Hermione Granger shyly waved at them, Luna Lovegood smiled brightly, Katie Bell waved at them with a friendly smile, and finally the Weasley twins Fred and George. It's Weasley! The twins cried out at the same time while everyone laughed with humor. Oops, sorry, Harry grumbled with nervousness as he rubbed the back of his head with a hand. It's okay, Fred began to say before his twin took over. We should get used to it by now. This is nice and all, but let's cut the CRP and tell us what are you doing here. Sirilla too growled at the newcomer, not being a very patient person. I would like to know as well, after all, your kind is not supposed to be here on Mysteria. Pyralis hissed with suspicion shining in her eyes. Hella, the lovely hellhound, showed her agreement by baring her teeth at the newcomers. Lilith, Reyna, Gabrielle and Iris stayed silent, but the look in their eyes clearly showed that they also wanted to know. The air became tense as the two groups stared at one another in silence. However, it didn't stay like this for long as Remus took a deep breath before opening his mouth to say. Well, this is a long story. 2 weeks had passed since Sirius, Hermione, Remus, Nymphadora, don't call me that, Katie, Luna, and the Weasley twins arrived in Little Hope, and needless to say that life was once again peaceful in the village. Sure, it took some time for them to adapt, but in the end, they were now like fish underwater. Hermione the Owl Mage decided to go working at the library after learning that they had won, and she became the apprentice of the resident Owl Mage, Eris, who taught everything she needed to know about her species and this world's nature. Iris had been more than happy to hire her, as the young Momono had proven to be very knowledgeable. George and Fred Weasley, for their parts, finally achieved their dream, opening to the Joker Wizard, a joke shop. Of course they had to ask permission from Harry and his girls, and so far, the inhabitants of the village appreciated their merchandises. In fact, the place became really popular, and especially among the children. Sirius Black, like the twins, opened a little business near the estuary, a bar to be precise. At first, he wanted to open a BRTHL, but he received sharp glares from many people, so instead he chose to open a bar. He named it the Black Dog, and like the joke shop, it was very popular from not only the inhabitants of Little Hope, but some sea folks as well. Remus Lupin, became a teacher at the village's school, and he was well liked by the students. Of the few humans who worked there, 4 to be precise, he was the favorite one. What was his subject? Ironically, it was astronomy. Nymphadora, call me that again if you want to die. Tonks, for her part, decided to become Lupin's assistant in his class. Sometimes, she even taught the students some tricks she learned during her time as Aurors, or she would entertain them with her special abilities. Luna Lovegood, the cute and childish fairy, was liked by everyone in the village thanks to her kind and bright nature. The children adored her, but sometimes, Harry received some complaints about her being a pervert, as she was sometimes found peeping at some people, be they females or males. It was found later that Luna was bisexual. She loved both men and women equally. While it wasn't a problem in Little Hope, the fairy had received a stern talk about her behavior, and she reluctantly accepted. So far, she was respecting her word, but sadly, she was now peeping exclusively on 2 people in particular, Hermione Granger, who was not really pleased with it, and Katie Bell, who didn't seem to mind much. Speaking of Katie, the blonde grizzly, thanks to her new strength, became a guard under the tutelage of Gabrielle and Hella. She was also sometimes used as bouncer at Sirius's bar. When she wasn't working, she would pass some time with her friends, and recently managed to befriend a new addition to Reina's SPA, Yang, the Ren Xiongmao. Grizzlies and Ren Xiangmaos are cousins of some sort, with the former being Brown's bears while the latter were pandas. In addition, after a few days, it was discovered that Katie was also bisexual, and it was the reason she tolerated Luna's constant peeping. Harry would be surprised if the 2 of them never end up together. Speaking of which, where is the village's mayor? He was in his office, finishing some paperworks. Well, he had finished, but his mind was still back at what Sirius and Remus told him 2 weeks ago in this same office. Flashback. Well, this is a long story, Remus answered softly to the group before him. Then go on, already. We don't have all day. Sirilla too snarled at the former werewolf, growling slightly in impatience. The rest of her HRM sisters shot her small glares of anger for her behavior, but none of them told her off. Instead, they focused back their attention on the newcomers, showing no expressions on their faces except narrowed eyes of suspicion. Harry's own eyes glowed slightly as he stared at the group. The wizards and recently turned Momonos glanced at one another in nervousness before Sirius opened his mouth to speak. We came to see you, Harry. I know you probably had no love for our kind or any inhabitants of England in general, not that I blame you, of course, but I needed to see you. Why? Harry asked him calmly with his arms crossed. I wanted to apologize to you, was his answer. The young man blinked in slight surprise at the words, but didn't voice it as he let the man spoke. I wanted to apologize for not being there for you. I shouldn't have gone after Pettigrew that night because of my foolishness. You have suffered with that Petunia and her damnable family, Sirius said in a sorrowful tone as his shoulders slumped drastically. Remus shot his longtime friend a look of pity while putting a comforting hand on his shoulder, to which Black accepted with a nod. Harry, was staring at his godfather for a moment before smiling. I never blamed you, Padfoot. I can't blame you for wanting revenge for the death of someone you saw as your brother. I can't blame you for being put into Azkaban thanks to the manipulation of this old fart dumb Asador. At those words, Sirius beamed a bit, happy that his godson wasn't angry with him. But I can blame you for being a reckless and irresponsible bstrd. Harry added with a teasing smirk. Sirius stared at him blankly for a moment before sighing in defeat as he muttered under his breath, I suppose I am. You are. Hermione, Tonks, Katie and Remus said at the same time before looking at each other in surprise. Hella and Lilith snickered while Raina, Iris, Gabrielle chuckled in amusement. Sirilla and Pyralis, looked on with softened straight faces and slight narrowed eyes. Harry rolled his eyes in amusement at the scene before clearing his throat. Silence echoed again afterwards. As amusing as it is to pick on Padfoot, can we go back to the matter at hand? Harry asked them with a straight face, except that we could see the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. While Sirius glared at his godson, everyone else either chuckled in amusement or sneezed in their hands to hide the fact they were amused. Indeed we should, Remus began to say with an amused look toward his longtime friend before looking back at Harry, ignoring the look of betrayal Sirius sent his way. Besides coming here to find you, there were other reasons. What are they? Gabrielle asked him with a curious raised eyebrow as her HRM sisters slightly leaned forward with the same look than her. We came here in hope of finding a better life for ourselves, Remus began to say in a grave tone before he looked at his comrades, silently prompting them to speak. I lost my parents to Death Eaters, and with me being born of a non-magical family, I have no rights in the wizarding world, Hermione said with sadness once she took the hint. I lost my entire family because we were not followers of the Dark Lord. I managed to survive, but I have nothing left on Earth, Katie said from her seat with nothing but sorrow. I lost my dad during a Death Eater's attack. We were nothing but BLD traitors to them, Luna answered with a bit of sadness in her tone as a shadow covered her eyes, hiding her expression. Me and my brother left Dash. Because, like Luna, we are BLD traitors. And because we don't want to be associated with Dumbledore Dash. And his greater good propaganda, George and Fred the last part together. As for me, I had to leave because of me being a was a werewolf, and because I'm allied with Sirius, Remus said with a deep sigh after he finished talking. I was targeted as well, because I was not a BLD purist like the rest of my dear family was, Sirius retorted with a scowl. Harry and the girls stared at one another before nodding their heads in understanding. They were good reasons. Fleeing a country where you are targeted for not supporting the current government was an understandable reason. But we also flee because of Dumbledore and his idiocies, Remus added with a snarl despite not being a wolf anymore. At the word, Dumbledore, and the vitriol in the man's voice, Harry and his wives all understood. That something must have happened, and it made them curious. What did the old coot do? The black-haired young man with emerald green eyes asked them with seriousness. End of flashback. To say he was shocked to learn that Dumbledore had literally sent teams across the world to find him was like saying the sky was blue. Of course he would go out, looking for his missing pawn. Harry was also shocked by everything that happened since his disappearance, to his lack of presence at the sorting to the attack on the Ministry of Magic by the Dark Lord and his clowns. Our hero felt nothing at the amount of deaths caused by Voldemort and his clowns, as it was their own fault for not doing their jobs properly. If the magical government wasn't so stupid, maybe all those things would have been avoided. They made their bed, now they lie in it. However, he had felt satisfaction at the fact that Dumbledore was no more seen as the great wizard he once was. After his disappearance, investigations were made and they found a lot of things. The old coot lost many titles but managed to stay as headmaster of a school. Apparently, he still had a lot of influence. He also lost supporters because of his constant search for Harry James Potter, who many believed to be dead, as no child would have survived such a torture he had snorted at that. And yet, the man persisted in finding him, and his obstinacy caused many people to leave him to his delusions. Now, only a handful of people still followed him. At least the man suffered. However, Harry's mind then went toward a little detail, the prophecy. He had known about it for years now, and from what he heard from Lady Magic, it was void and had been since the day she saved him from certain death. But even if the prophecy was no more, Dumbledore kept saying it was still active. He really lost his mind. Not that he had one to begin with. However, his thoughts were suddenly interrupted by someone entering his office. Looking up, he was a bit surprised to see Lilith making her way toward him, swinging her peach a bit in a stuck manner. Before he could ask her what she was doing here, the succubus hugged him tightly, smothering his face with her melons, before giving him a big kiss. "Hello, love," she whispered into his ears once she pulled her lips away from his. "Hello to you too, gorgeous. But what are you doing here?" Harry asked her with slight curiosity. Let's just say I decided to leave my work for some good time with a handsome man," Lilith responded sultrily as she pressed her body further against his while shooting him a stuck wink. "My, are you corny?" he asked her with amusement. "Will you be a good husband and help me with that?" she asked him innocently while batting her eyelashes. "What a woman wants," Harry responded with a smirk before snapping his fingers. A second later, the two of them were no longer in the office but in the bedroom. With a pleased smile, Lilith had her husband sit down on her bed and he watched as she began undressing. At the sight of her beauty, Harry couldn't help but feeling corny himself, even if it wasn't the first time he saw her naked. After a minute, she now stood completely unclothed and eyed Harry sexually. "You are as appealing as ever, love," our hero said to the succubus with a sincere tone. "Thank you, dear. Now, let's begin," Lilith said with a purr as he waved a hand to get rid of his own clothes. As she approached him, Harry got an irkton as he felt like he was being approached by a goddess. With a smile, Katie pushed him onto the bed, and just as she crawled onto him, our hero gave her his famous cheeky grin. When the succubus finally reached him, his lips locked onto his and they shared a passionate kiss. Of pleasure escaped from their mouths as his hands went through her blue hair. Her lips were warm and soft to the touch, much like that last several times they kissed one another. His heart-throbbing pee-pee was pressed against her, but Lilith kept on kissing her husband, ignoring that little fact for now. At the same time, her melons were pressed against his chest, and while they weren't the biggest, they were still pretty enjoyable to feel. The succubus then began moving down, kissing him along the way, his neck, then his chest, and finally she got to his abdomen. Her red eyes landed on the big pee-pee, throbbing before her, and couldn't help but licking her lips in anticipation. Slowly, she reached forward with her right hand, touching it slowly before eventually, wrapping her hand around it. Harry sharply planted his head onto the pillow, knowing what she was about to do. Her hand wrapped around his pee-pee, she shot him a stuck look before starting moving it up and down, gently stroking him. Our hero took a sharp inhale at the feeling, but then in please when he felt her kissing and liked the head of his pee-pee. Smirking at the sound he was making, the succubus redoubled her efforts and liked and kissed his pee-pee even more. Soon enough, thanks to her care, pre-juices soon leaked out and she enjoyed the sweet taste on her lips. A second later, tears appeared in her red eyes as a feeling of lust passed through her body. "I can't wait anymore. I want that pee-pee of yours inside me." "Now," the succubus cried in lust before looking at her lover. Harry was looking at her with lust, but then was stopped by Lilith's foot pressed against his chest. No, dear. Not here," the succubus cooed at him mischievously before turning over on her belly. At the sight of her peach, which was the biggest among his girls, his pee-pee hardened even more as a feeling of longing passed through our hero's body. Slowly, Harry grasped her peach cheeks and she gasped at the feeling of his hands on her skin before she shot him a look filled with lust and pleasure. Spreading her peach cheeks, he slowly lowered his pee-pee toward her anus before inserting it into her peach, which caused her to loudly. With a smirk, Harry began to go in inside her at a slow pace, which caused the succubus to even more as more and more of his PP was entering her. "Your PP is so big it feels so good," Lilith with pleasure while wriggling her peach a bit. Once he was all the way inside her, Harry began to move his PP in and out of her peach. Lilith held on to the sheets with iron grips while her eyes were closed tightly. Of pleasure and lust escaped her mouth at each move. The sound caused Harry to move a bit faster and the succubus's became louder. After a few seconds, our hero started pounding into her harder and faster than before. Due to this, Lilith's face dived into the pillow, trying to quiet down her screams as the last thing both wanted was to attract the attention of the maids. "Harry! F me harder!" Lilith hissed at her lover as she felt nothing but lust and pleasure. "If that what you want, my love," our hero whispered into her ears before pounding harder into her. For the next few minutes, Harry kept thrusting in and out of her peach while Lilith kept in pleasure, his tongue hanging outside his mouth. Until... "I'm going to leak," Harry with gritted teeth as he pended her peach. Yes. "Leak inside my peach, Harry. Give me your juice." The succubus cried loudly in pleasure and lust. Barely a few seconds later, Harry gasped in relief as he shot his juices inside her peach, filling her inside with his juices. Lilith in delight, mainly because of the warm substance inside her. With another sigh, our hero took his PP out and his juices leaked out of her peach before sliding down her legs. For a moment the two stayed like this, catching their breath. But then, Lilith sharply turned around and Harry didn't have the time to react when his lips were pressed against hers. A second or two, his mind went blank, but once he realized what was going on, he returned the kiss. "Ready for round 2? The succubus asked him with a smirk. At those words, Harry grinned back while his PP went hard again as if eager to enter her again. Time skip. 3 hours later, Harry was once again in his office, doing some paperworks. An hour and a half earlier, he and Lilith went to their separate ways after another love session with one another. He had released his juice into her 2 or 3 times before they separated. While the succubus went elsewhere, probably at the SPA to relax, he went back to his office. When he arrived there, he found that a new pile of papers was on his desk and, with a groan, he started going through them. He was halfway through it when someone entered his office. It was Kashali the Kikimora. "Mr. Harry, there are a group of people waiting for you at the living room," the newcomer said to him after bowing to the waist. Those words caught our hero's curiosity as he looked at his head made with narrowed eyes. "How many?" he asked her in a serious tone, but it was easy to detect the undertone of curiosity in his voice. 3, 1 human and 2 momonos, was his answer. Can you tell me more?" he asked her with a thoughtful expression. "Yes, they said they know you," Kashali told him in a calm tone. Frowning, Harry went deep in thought. He didn't know a lot of momonos and a part of him suddenly felt dread as he thought that those newcomers possibly came from the same world than him: Sirius, Remus, Hermione, Luna, Katie and the twins. "Thank you for your service, Kashali. I will handle those people," he said to the Kikimora after a moment of thought. She bowed to the waist again before leaving the room, heading elsewhere in the manor. With a sigh, Harry left his office, heading toward the leaving room where he saw 3 people sitting on the couch. He froze upon seeing them as a look of shock appeared on his face. The human was a man in his late 30s with black hair and kind blue eyes, the other 2 were Genkos, and all of them were people he recognized instantly. After all, he lived with them for years and had loved them dearly. "Mom. Dad. Jane," he called out softly just as the newcomers turned their heads to stare at him with teary eyes. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 7. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Asian Lionheart 310 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.